The door wasn't locked. That was his first mistake. The second was screwing my wife. I stepped inside, closing it behind me without a sound. The place smelled like fresh paint and money. Hardwood floors so polished they reflected the city lights pouring in through floor-to-ceiling windows. A designer couch, a glass coffee table, the kind of furniture that wasn't made for comfort, just for looking expensive. I took my time, walking through his space, running a hand over the smooth, untouched surfaces. It didn't take long to spot what I was looking for. A gray sweater, folded over the arm of a chair. Leah's. I lifted it, caught the familiar trace of her perfume, the one I used to smell on my shirts when she hugged me from behind. Now, it clung to the air of another man's house. I didn't get angry. That wasn't my style. Anger was loud. It made men sloppy. And I had no intention of being sloppy tonight. I settled into the chair facing the door, elbows resting on my knees, waiting. The clock on the wall ticked steady. I'd given myself an hour. If he didn't show up, I'd leave. No sense wasting time on a coward. 40 minutes in, I heard the car pull up. A few seconds later, footsteps approached, slow and confident. The kind of walk a man has when he thinks nothing in his world can touch him. The lock clicked, the door swung open, and there he was. Tom Moore. Tall, trim, pressed button-down rolled at the sleeves. The kind of guy who used expensive aftershave and played golf on Fridays. He walked in, setting a set of keys on the counter, scrolling through his phone with one hand. It took a second for him to notice me. When he did, he froze, the phone lowering just enough for me to see the flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "What the hell are you doing here?" I leaned back, slow, measured. "Waiting on you." His jaw tightened. He glanced toward the hallway, then back at me. He wasn't scared. Not yet. He still thought he had the upper hand. "You break into my house?" he asked. Door was open. I gestured to the sweater on the chair. Recognized something of mine. His eyes flicked to it, then back to me. A lot of things probably ran through his mind then. Maybe he was thinking about calling the cops. Maybe he was trying to figure out if I had a weapon. Maybe he was realizing, finally realizing, that this wasn't going to go his way. He swallowed. "Look, Lucas." I held up a hand, stopping him. "Save it." I pulled a folded stack of photos from my jacket and tossed them on the table. They spread out, glossy in the light. Leah. Him. Different places. A hotel parking lot. A restaurant booth. A side street in broad daylight. Not even careful. His face went blank, but I could see his pulse hammering in his neck. He let out a breath, straightened his shoulders. "It's not what you think." I almost laughed. "You sure?" He stared at the pictures, weighing his next move. He didn't deny it. Didn't apologize. He just started calculating. That's when I knew exactly what kind of man he was. Not a fighter. Not a leader. Just a suit with a good haircut and the right friends. The door behind him opened. Leah. She froze in the hallway, a silk robe tied loose around her waist, auburn hair in a messy bun. Her gaze flicked between me and Tom, lips parting like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. For a long second, none of us moved. Then I stood. She took a step forward. "Lucas." I shook my head. "Don't." She closed her mouth. I studied her, letting the silence stretch. I could see the thoughts spinning behind her eyes. The fear. The embarrassment. Maybe even regret. But regret didn't matter. It didn't change anything. I grabbed my keys off the table, turned to Tom. "You always wanted a man with money, Leah," I said, voice even. "Let's see if he's worth losing everything." Then I walked out. I walked out of that house and didn't look back. Drove straight past my shop, past my street, out past the town limits until the neon glow of Gunner's Bar came into view. It had been years since I'd been here, but nothing had changed. Same flickering sign, same cracked pavement in the lot, same dent in the jukebox inside from a fight that happened before I ever stepped foot in Franklin. I parked, killed the engine, and sat there for a second. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. I wasn't angry. Not in the way most men would be. I'd seen worse betrayals in my life. The only difference was, this one had my name on it. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The place smelled like cigarette smoke and cheap beer. Dim lights, sticky floors, a row of old men hunched over the bar watching a game they didn't care about. Hell, look what the wind blew in. I turned my head and saw Bobby Reyes at the corner table, boots kicked up, a half-empty beer in front of him. He looked the same as ever, tense skin, dark hair going gray at the edges, eyes that had seen too much but still carried a spark of amusement. I walked over, pulled out the chair across from him, and sat down. He studied me for a second, then tipped his beer toward the bartender. Whiskey. Neat. He looked back at me. I take it this isn't a social visit. The bartender slid the glass across the table. I picked it up, took a slow sip, let the burn settle. Leah's screwing more. Bobby exhaled through his nose. Figured something was off last time I saw her. She got that restless look. I nodded. Caught him tonight. Didn't say much. Didn't need to. He smirked. That why you're here? Drowning your sorrows in good company. I don't drown, I said. His smile widened. That's right. You don't. So what's the plan? I looked down at my glass, watching the way the light hit the amber liquid. Haven't decided yet. Bobby leaned back, watching me. You gonna make him pay? I didn't answer right away. I didn't believe in revenge for revenge's sake. But I did believe in consequences. Leah had made her choice. Tom had, too. And I wasn't the kind of man to let them walk away from that without feeling it. I set the glass down, tapped my fingers against the table. I want him to regret it, I said finally. Bobby nodded, thoughtful. Regret's a funny thing. You gotta hit him where it hurts. I know. I glanced at him. You still got contacts at the billboard company? He laughed. You really want to play it like that? I want people talking. I want the whole town looking at them sideways. I want her to walk into work and feel eyes on her. I want him to lose deals, cause people don't trust a man who can't keep his own house in order. Bobby grinned. You always were a strategic bastard. He downed the rest of his beer and stood. I'll make some calls. I stayed at the bar another hour, not drinking much, just listening to the hum of voices, the occasional burst of laughter, the scrape of pool cues against felt. When I finally stepped back outside, the air was cool, the sky a deep black, no stars. I drove back to town, straight to my shop. Parked behind the garage, killed the engine. The place was quiet, just the faint hum of streetlights buzzing in the distance. I stepped inside, locked the door behind me. The shop was the one thing in my life that was mine. Built from the ground up, no debts, no partners. Just sweat, long hours, and knowing how to fix what other people broke. It smelled like oil and metal, the scent of honest work. I walked past the cars, past the tool benches, and into my office. The desk was cluttered, bills, receipts, a few old photos. One of them was of Cora, my daughter. She must have been 10 when it was taken. Big grin, holding up a wrench like she was ready to take over the shop. I picked up the photo, thumbed the edge of the frame. We hadn't talked in months. She was still angry, still holding on to things I couldn't fix. The door creaked open behind me. I didn't look up. You lock up? Yeah, Bobby said, stepping inside. He dropped into the chair across from my desk, stretching out his legs. Billboards handled. Goes up tomorrow morning. I nodded. Good. You think she'll come running? I set the photo back down. Doesn't matter if she does. Bobby studied me, then sighed. Hell of a way to spend a night. I exhaled through my nose, rubbing a hand over my face. It's just getting started. Morning came early. I was up before the sun, standing outside the shop with a black coffee in one hand, a cigarette in the other. I didn't smoke often, but last night called for it. The street was quiet, just the distant hum of a garbage truck making its rounds. Across town, people were waking up, making breakfast, heading to work. And Leah was about to get the worst start to a morning she'd ever had. Bobby pulled up in his old Chevy, window down, grinning like a man who'd just watched the world burn. You seen it yet? He called out. I flicked the cigarette into the lot and shook my head. Let's go. We drove down Main Street, past the diner, the hardware store, the bank. The streets were filling up, mothers walking their kids to school, old men reading newspapers on benches. Franklin wasn't a big town, but it was big enough for people to care when something out of the ordinary happened. And this? This was out of the ordinary. As we rounded the last turn, there it was. The billboard. White background. Black letters. Simple. Some men build families. Others steal them. No names. No pictures. Just enough to make people wonder. Just enough to make Leah and Tom sweat. Bobby let out a low whistle. Damn, that's beautiful. I watched a woman pause at the crosswalk, staring up at the sign, nudging the man next to her. They exchanged a few words, then kept walking. Across the street, a couple guys in work boots stood near a truck, looking up, shaking their heads. Word was already spreading. Bobby chuckled. Think she's seen it yet? If she hasn't, she will. I had no intention of hanging around to watch her reaction. I had better things to do. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. Unknown number. I answered anyway. You son of a bitch. Leah's voice, tight, controlled. I took a sip of my coffee. Morning to you too. You think this is funny? Little bit. A sharp breath. She was trying to stay calm, but I could hear it in her voice, panic, anger, maybe even regret. Probably thought she could control the damage. She always did think she was the smartest person in the room. This is public humiliation, she hissed. You're making a spectacle out of this. No, you made a spectacle. I just made sure people were looking. Silence. I waited. I wasn't going to be the first to break it. Finally, she spoke, lower this time. Lucas, be reasonable. This doesn't just hurt me, it hurts Cora. My jaw tightened. She was trying to use our daughter now, trying to make this about something bigger than her own mistakes. It almost worked. Almost. Cora already lost respect for you, I said flatly. This just lets the rest of the town catch up. A long pause. I could hear traffic in the background, people moving, talking. This isn't over, she said finally. It never is. I hung up. Bobby smirked. That go how you expected? More or less. We drove back to the shop, and I got to work like it was any other day. Fixed an alternator, checked in a couple regulars, changed some brakes. Normal. Steady. But the undercurrent of the morning was still there, humming like an engine just beneath the surface. By noon, Claire Brooks, Leah's office assistant, walked in. Petite, glasses, always dressed neat. She had that way about her, quiet, observant, never one to waste words. She hesitated by the door before stepping in, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. I wiped my hands on a rag and nodded toward the counter. What can I do for you, Claire? She set her purse down, folded her arms. I assume you put that billboard up. I didn't answer. Just let the question hang. She exhaled, shaking her head. You should know, Leah's in full damage control mode. She's already calling around, trying to figure out who to smooth things over with. But it's not working. Too many people saw it. Too many people know. Good. She studied me for a second, like she was deciding something. Then she leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. She's planning something, Lucas. I don't know what yet, but she's not the type to just roll over. I nodded. Appreciate the heads up. Claire hesitated again, like there was more she wanted to say, then sighed and reached into her bag, pulling out a file folder. She used company accounts to pay for some of her outings. Thought you might find it useful. I took the folder, flipped it open. Hotel receipts. Dinners. A flight to Chicago. All under More Development LLC. Bobby let out a low chuckle from behind me. Now that's interesting. I closed the folder. You didn't have to do this. Claire adjusted her glasses. I steady. No. But I did. She picked up her purse and turned to leave, pausing at the door. Take care of yourself, Lucas. I watched her go, then looked at Bobby. He grinned. Well, that just made things more fun. I exhaled through my nose, glancing down at the folder again. This wasn't just about pride anymore. This was leverage. And leverage meant control. It was time to tighten the screws. I spent the next couple of days working on the next phase. The first wave had hit hard. Leah was feeling the heat, and Tom was sweating bullets. Word of the billboard had spread like wildfire. By Thursday morning, I could tell from the way people looked at me that everyone knew what had gone down. The whispers were louder than the engine of any car I'd ever fixed. Bobby was right by my side, his hands as greasy as mine, working through the usual jobs, but his mind was always on what came next. He was like a dog circling a bone, always looking for the next way to get even. We'd made a solid plan, and now it was time to implement the next step. I walked past the counter, glanced at the clock. It was nearing noon, the perfect time for some action. I picked up my phone, dialed a number I hadn't used in years, the one with connections in the real estate world. The line clicked as it picked up. Lucas Evans, I said, my voice low. Lucas, long time no hear, came the reply. It was Frankie Doyle, an old acquaintance from the biker days. Back then, Frankie had been a middleman, selling cars, houses, anything that could move. Now, he'd leveled up into the real estate game himself. I'd helped him out a few times over the years, and when you're in the game long enough, favors are currency. Got a favor to ask, I said, getting straight to the point. I need you to make a couple of calls. Moore's trying to get a deal on a new development project, needs a few connections greased. I want you to pull the plug on that. There was a pause. You got it. Just tell me why, Lucas. Doesn't matter why, I said, voice steady. Just make it happen. No more deals. No more credibility. Frankie chuckled. I'll make sure they feel the pressure. Don't worry. You don't need to make it personal, just business, I added. Business? Oh, it's always personal when it comes to you, Evans. I hung up without another word, then walked into the back, where Bobby was elbow-deep in an engine. Frankie's got it covered. Tom's done for. Bobby wiped his hands on a rag, grinning. That's gonna hit him hard. No trust in a man who can't keep his house clean. I nodded. The moves were being made, and we weren't done yet. Later that afternoon, I sat with a cup of coffee in the office, staring at the file Claire had left me. The more I looked at those receipts, the clearer it became. Tom had been using the business accounts to fund a lot more than just a few dinners and flights. There were hotel bills for weekends away, personal shopping, and even a couple of receipts for things that didn't quite add up. I tapped the paper with my finger, thinking, this wasn't just about punishing Leah anymore. Tom had dug his own grave, and it was time to bury him in it. I made the next call, this time to my attorney. I kept things short and professional, laid out the receipts Claire had handed me, and told him to look into them. I wasn't about to let this one slide. Tom and Leah had been using company money for personal gain, and that wasn't just a problem between us. It was a problem for their company, their employees, and the people who trusted them. When I hung up, I felt the weight of the situation shift. This wasn't just about humiliating them anymore. It was about making sure they never walked away from this unscathed. They were going to lose everything. The next day, Leah made her move. She showed up at the shop, striding through the front door with a tight expression on her face. Her eyes locked on mine, a mix of anger and desperation. She wasn't wearing the usual polished look. No high heels, no fancy coat, just jeans and a sweater that didn't look like it belonged to her. It didn't matter. She didn't need to look good. She just needed to talk. Lucas, she said, voice tight. I need to talk. I didn't move from the counter. I wasn't going to make it easy. You got 5 minutes. She took a breath, her hands twisting at her sides. This is going too far. I let the silence hang in the air for a second before speaking. You think you can make this go away with a conversation? I'm trying to save what's left of our life, Lucas. I leaned forward, putting my hands on the counter. There's nothing left, Leah. You already made your choice. Her eyes flitted to the floor, then back up at me. You want me to beg? Is that it? Doesn't matter what I want. It's over. She took a step back, frustration creeping into her voice. This is unfair. I didn't flinch. You get to be unfair. You don't get to control how this ends. There was a beat of silence before she turned and walked out, not looking back. That was the last time she came to see me. As the door clicked shut, I felt the weight of the past few days settle in. This wasn't about making things right. It was about getting what I deserved. Getting what they deserved. And everything I'd done so far, every step, had been a step toward control. By the end of the week, I knew I had them right where I wanted them. Now, it was time to finish what I started. The days that followed had a certain stillness to them, a quiet before the storm. I kept my head down, working, taking care of the usual business. But all the while, I could feel the tension building. Leah was scrambling, calling anyone she thought might help. Tom was more than just worried. I could see it in his eyes whenever I passed him in town. Word about the billboard had spread, and now people were starting to talk about the shady dealings beneath his business. I didn't go out of my way to make it easy for him. I kept my distance, stayed focused on the shop. But I knew that his life, his reputation, was hanging by a thread. By the time the next Tuesday rolled around, I got the call. Frankie had done his part. Moore's deals had been put on ice. No one was picking up the phone when he called about new projects. Even his usual contacts were suddenly avoiding him. The man had no idea what hit him. He was too busy covering up his tracks to realize he'd already lost. I leaned against the hood of a customer's car, listening to Bobby talk about a new engine he was rebuilding, but my mind was elsewhere. Frankie had done his job. The legal side was falling into place. Now it was time for the final move. Around noon, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered without hesitation. You sure about this? It was Tom, his voice tight with frustration. I stayed quiet, letting him sweat. You think I'm just gonna lay down and take it? You got no choice, I said, my voice steady. You started this, and now you're gonna finish it. I'll go public, Lucas. I'll tell them everything. About you. About your past. I almost laughed. The man was grasping. He had nothing left to threaten me with. You think that's gonna scare me? I let the question hang in the air, giving him a moment to realize how hollow his words were. I'm already public. Always have been. So, no, that won't scare me. There was a long pause on the line. Then he muttered something under his breath, probably trying to find a way out that didn't involve him losing face. What the hell do you want? You already know what I want. You lose, Tom. You're out. This is my town now. Not if I have anything to say about it. His voice shook now. Well, you don't, I said, clicking the phone off. I let out a breath and walked back into the shop. I was done talking, done playing games. This wasn't about conversation anymore. This was about the consequences that came with crossing the wrong man. I glanced at the clock. 2:30 p.m. I knew that, by now, things were already in motion. Tom would try to fight back, try to hold on to whatever scraps of pride he had left. But it wasn't going to matter. His game was over. Just as I finished wiping off my hands, Claire walked in, her quiet footsteps giving her away. She was holding something, a manila envelope, small, inconspicuous. She didn't look at me right away, just set it on the counter, her fingers lingering for a moment before she pulled them back. I thought you might need this, she said, her voice low. I didn't ask what it was. I didn't need to. I opened the envelope and pulled out the papers inside. The divorce settlement between Tom and Leah was already on the table. She'd signed it. He had too. No fighting, no bargaining. They were already moving toward a split. I folded the papers back into the envelope and slipped it into my jacket pocket. It's over, I said to Claire, not looking up. She nodded, though she didn't say anything. I'd never expected her to speak much. She just did her part and kept to herself. But I'd seen the way she looked at me, the way she supported my every move, quietly and without question. You going to tell Cora? Claire asked, breaking the silence. I shook my head. Not yet. Not until it's really over. But she'll know. She'll understand. I walked outside to my truck and glanced up at the sky. The weather was shifting, clouds rolling in, but no rain yet. A storm was coming, and I wasn't just talking about the weather. By the time I reached my house, I knew things would be different. Leah was probably home, stewing in the mess she'd made. Tom would be drowning in the fallout. And me? I had my future to look forward to. I sat in the driveway for a minute, the engine of the truck still running. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about control. And I had it now. As I got out of the truck, I saw Cora's old bike propped up on the porch. She hadn't been home much since we stopped talking. I wasn't sure when or if she would come back, but I wasn't going to make the same mistakes again. The door opened behind me, and I turned. It was Bobby. You ready for the next round? I nodded. Yeah, I'm ready. Bobby grinned. Let's finish this. We walked into the house, and I closed the door behind us, not looking back. The past had been dealt with. Now, it was time for me to start building the future. The next few days passed by in a blur of movement. The legal stuff was taken care of, the business fallout was already starting to hit Tom, and Leah had her hands full trying to save whatever dignity she had left. But for me, everything was settling into place. Cora hadn't called, but I didn't expect her to right away. That wasn't the way things worked. Time would tell. I spent my days at the shop, doing what I did best, fixing cars, tuning engines, getting things running smooth. The routine was familiar, comforting. I didn't have to think about the past or the mistakes I'd made. I just worked. And it worked for me. Bobby was still hanging around, helping with the bigger jobs when needed. He wasn't much for talking about what had happened between me and Leah, and that suited me just fine. We didn't need to speak about it. He knew I'd handled it, and that was enough. But today was different. I just finished up with the truck's exhaust when I heard a car pull up. It wasn't anything unusual, but when I saw the familiar car pull into the lot, my heart skipped a beat. Leah. She stepped out, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, looking nothing like the woman who'd walked out of my life. She wasn't in a suit or anything fancy. Just jeans and a plain shirt, like she was trying to pretend things were normal. I didn't move. I didn't even flinch. I just leaned against the fender of the truck and waited. She walked toward the shop, the sound of her shoes crunching on the gravel getting closer with each step. When she reached the door, she stopped. I didn't say anything. She didn't either. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the breeze and the hum of the shop's lights overhead. Finally, she spoke. I want to talk. I gave a half shrug, glancing at the truck behind me. Talk about what? About Cora. About us. She hesitated. About what you want. I didn't move. I just stood there, letting her words settle. What I want? I asked, raising an eyebrow. She nodded. You've made your point, Lucas. But this, it doesn't have to be the end. You and me, we've been through too much to just walk away like this. I let out a breath, straightened up, and crossed my arms. You don't get it, do you? Her eyes shifted, like she was trying to find the right words. I know I messed up, Lucas. But I didn't want to lose everything. I stared at her, letting the silence stretch between us. You already lost everything. That's the point. Everything. Her voice rose slightly. I didn't lose you. Not yet. I looked at her. This wasn't the woman I'd once known. The one I trusted. The one who had promised me everything, only to throw it away for a man who wasn't worth a damn. The woman standing in front of me was just a shadow of that person, trying to salvage whatever she could. I'm not the same man I was, I said, my voice calm but firm. I'm not the one you thought you could walk all over. You don't get to come back in and rewrite this. She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. You think you're going to walk in here and make it all better with some apology? You think I'm going to just let it go and forget? I shook my head. No, it doesn't work like that. Not with me. Not anymore. She took a step back, her face flushed. So this is it then? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I turned toward the truck, grabbed the rag off the workbench, and wiped my hands off. Yeah, this is it. You made your choice, and now you've got to live with it. There was a long pause before she spoke again, quieter this time. I'm sorry, Lucas. I glanced at her, but there was no emotion behind it anymore. Sorry doesn't fix it, Leah. Sorry doesn't bring back trust. Sorry doesn't change what you did. She looked down at the ground, then back up at me, her eyes clouded with something regret. Maybe. But I wasn't interested in her regret. I was interested in moving forward. Goodbye, Leah, I said, turning back to the truck. You should go. She stood there for a few moments longer, but then, without saying another word, she walked out the door. I didn't watch her leave. I didn't need to. After she was gone, I let out a breath and walked back into the shop. Bobby was standing near the counter, watching the whole thing from the corner of his eye. He didn't say anything, but I could tell he'd been waiting for it. Feels like closure, huh? He said, his voice low. I looked at him, nodding slowly. Yeah, it does. Bobby grinned. Now, about that job you promised me. I smirked, grabbed a wrench, and tossed it to him. Let's get back to work. For the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of everything lift. It was done. I was done. And now I could finally focus on the future. The future that was mine to build. A few weeks had passed since Leah walked out the door for the last time. The dust had settled, but the air still carried the weight of it all, like everything in town knew exactly what had gone down. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. I was done. And that was enough. The shop was busier than ever. Word had spread, not just about the billboard or the fallout with Leah, but about the way I handled it. People respected that. You don't get anywhere by bending, and that's what most people forgot when things went south. They bend. They beg. They try to make it right. But not me. Not anymore. Bobby had moved on to running his own crew for a bigger project, but he checked in now and then. It wasn't about keeping tabs on me. It was about mutual respect. He knew when to leave me alone, when to step back. One afternoon, after closing up, I was sitting at my desk when my phone buzzed. It was Cora. I'd been waiting for this, not sure when or how it would happen, but I knew it would. Hey, she said when I picked up, her voice sounding different. Softer. There was still some distance, but I could tell it wasn't as thick as it had been. Hey, kid. How's it going? I've been thinking about things. About you. About me. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. She was taking her time. I guess I didn't really understand everything, you know? I thought you were just gonna throw it all away. But you didn't. You held your ground. You didn't let her tear everything up. I leaned back in the chair, letting her words settle in. I'm still standing, kid. That's all that matters. She was quiet for a minute, and I knew she was thinking about it. Really thinking about it. You think I can come by sometime? She finally asked. Whenever you're ready. I paused. I'm not going anywhere. After the call ended, I let out a breath. There was no magic moment. No instant fix. But I knew this was a step. Maybe the first one. The next day, I found myself standing in front of the bank with my hands in my jacket pockets. I had a meeting with the lawyer to finalize the settlement. It wasn't a big deal. It was a formality at this point. But as I walked through the doors and signed the papers, I realized just how much I had left behind, and how much I had gained. Everything was in motion now. The past was just that, the past. No more loose ends. No more ghosts hanging around. As I walked out of the bank, I spotted a guy in a suit leaning against his car on the corner. He straightened when he saw me. Lucas Evans? He asked, his tone a little too sharp. Yeah, that's me. I'm Thomas Moore's lawyer. We need to talk about a few things regarding your settlement. I didn't smile, but I wasn't angry. Just steady. You can tell Moore he can keep whatever's left of his dignity. It's over. He blinked, clearly thrown off by my tone. I don't think you understand. I cut him off. I understand just fine. Tell him I'm not interested in negotiating. Not now. Not ever. I turned and walked away, not looking back. There was no need to. By the time I got back to the shop, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the pavement. A car pulled into the lot. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Cora's beat-up old sedan rolled to a stop, and she got out, a hesitant smile on her face. I straightened up from the hood of a car, wiping my hands on a rag. "Hey, kid," I said, watching her approach. She glanced around at the shop, a small nod of approval. "Looks good. You've been busy." "Had a lot of work to do," I said. "Figured I might as well stay busy while everything's settled." "Yeah," she said, her voice softer now. "I get that." She stood there for a second, and for the first time in a long time, I could feel the distance between us starting to shrink. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "For everything. I didn't understand. I didn't need to say anything. I just nodded. That was enough." She looked up at me, her eyes steady. "I'd like to come around more. If that's okay." I nodded again, this time with a little more conviction. "You don't need to ask, Cora. This is your place too." She smiled, a real one this time. Not forced. Just honest. "I'll see you tomorrow, then." "Yeah, kid. Tomorrow." As she got in her car and drove off, I stood there for a minute, just watching. The town felt different. Lighter, somehow. I didn't need to say goodbye to the past. It was already gone. And the future? Well, it was there for the taking. I turned back to the shop, the doors wide open, ready for whatever came next. Because I was done looking back. The past had already had its say. Now it was my turn to write the next chapter. And I wasn't about to waste it.